One thing that is not very well known about the concentration camps of the Second World War is that within the barbed wire fences of some, the very men who were the commandants in control during the war years were later condemned to death inside of them. For example, Karl Otto Koch, the commandant of Buchenwald, was shot for bringing the SS into disrepute inside of his own camp, but instead of imposing his reign of brutality, he was a prisoner. But the most barbaric and shocking commandant of them all, Rudolf Höss, was brought to Auschwitz, the camp which he created and expanded to the point that over 1 million people would die inside of, and on a specially built gallows just for him, he was taken by an executioner who secured a noose around his neck. Höss was a depraved mass murderer who did days before his death realise the sheer magnitude of his crimes. Höss became the last man to be publicly executed inside of Auschwitz and even Poland, but his execution was rather public, and there were people who managed to obtain access to the former camp to witness the proceedings. Today we look at the public execution of the Auschwitz Commandant. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Rudolf Höss, before he joined the Nazi Party, did have a relatively dark early life. He was actually imprisoned for murder, as he attacked and beat a schoolteacher to death upon the orders of Martin Bormann, the future personal secretary of Adolf Hitler. But Höss joined the Nazi Party early on, and he would rise throughout the ranks of the SS, Heinrich Himmler's paramilitary group. He joined the SS upon the recommendation of Heinrich Himmler, who wanted more men inside of the group, and he then quickly moved into the Death's Head unit. Höss became a guard inside of the concentration camps, serving inside different sites, and was even the man in command of the first execution of a Jehovah's Witness conscientious objector inside of Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Höss was recommended for leadership inside the SS, and he achieved further promotion, but then he was assigned to go and inspect a site in Poland where the SS believed they could make a new large concentration camp. Höss visited and he wrote a report, and he was then given command to create a transition camp for 10,000 prisoners from the existing complex of well-preserved buildings. What he constructed was Auschwitz concentration camp. He lived there at the site with his wife and children in a villa, and as months and years passed, during 1940, Auschwitz expanded into a huge and large site. But it was a place where execution and extermination was the main purpose of the site. Places such as a death wall were constructed for thousands of inmates to be shot against, and Höss would be the one who often witnessed these killings himself. He was later in 1941 summoned to Berlin to meet with Heinrich Himmler and to receive personal orders. He then was told to instigate the final solution into Auschwitz, and Höss experimented with different ways of killing as many people as easily as possible. It was he who introduced Zyklon B, the pesticide used inside the gas chambers, into the concentration camp system, and he personally witnessed the trials of this. Inside of Auschwitz, hundreds of thousands were exterminated and killed inside Höss's gas chambers. He later said of this, "Technically it wasn't so hard. It would not have been hard to exterminate even greater numbers. The killing itself took the least time. You could dispose of 2,000 heads in half an hour, but it was the burning that took all the time. The killing was easy. You didn't even need guards to drive them into the chambers. They just went in, expecting to take a shower, and instead of water, we turned on poison gas. The whole thing went by very quickly." He continued to expand the killing capacity of Auschwitz, until in 1942 he became embroiled in scandal, beginning a relationship with a prisoner of the camp. The following year, Höss was replaced because of this, and he was given different duties. In May 1944 he went back to Auschwitz to oversee and supervise an operation that carried his name, in which 430,000 Hungarian Jews were killed in 56 deadly days. The facilities he had set up could not cope with the sheer amount of dead, and many of the bodies were being burned in large open pits. Around 10,000 were being gassed a day. Höss ended the war working inside of the all-female concentration camp of Ravensbrück, where he oversaw the completion of a gas chamber, and also forced around 2,000 women into the chamber of death. But he knew that his time would be up if he was captured at the end of the Second World War, and he tried to live inside of a German town, Gottrupel, under a false name. His wife knew where he was, and she knew that he was masquerading as a gardener. Himmler had given him a cyanide capsule in case he fell into enemy hands, but his wife was arrested, and she would then lead to him being captured, as the inside of his wedding ring gave away his true identity when he was approached in 1946 by a collection of British soldiers. It was said of this encounter that, Höss insisting he was a lowly gardener, but Alexander saw his wedding ring and ordered Höss to take it off, threatening to cut his finger off if he did not. Höss's name was inscribed inside. The soldiers accompanying Alexander began to beat Höss with axe handles. After a few moments and a minor internal debate, Alexander pulled them off. Later, Rudolf Höss was also brought to the Nuremberg trials, not as a defendant, but as a defense witness for Ernst Kaltenbrunner, the most senior SS official on trial. In this he made some brazen claims stating that, "I commanded Auschwitz until the 1st of December 1943, and estimate that at least 2.5 million victims were executed and exterminated there by gassing and burning, and at least another 500,000 succumbed to starvation and disease, making a total of around 3 million dead. This figure represents about 70 to 80% of all persons sent to Auschwitz as prisoners, the remainder having been selected and used for slave labour in the concentration camp industries." He later revised his death toll, but he was then extradited to Poland to stand trial in the nation of his greatest crimes, and he revised his death toll to around 1.1 million. Höss's trial lasted 2 weeks from the 11th to the 29th of March 1947, and he was then sentenced to death by hanging. But many of his former victims and prisoners actually petitioned the judge and the courtroom to allow a special execution to take place for Höss, this being inside the walls of his former camp on a specially built gallows. This was permitted and allowed, and Höss would be executed inside of Auschwitz. Whilst he was awaiting his execution, 4 days before it took place, Höss made a shocking statement acknowledging his crimes. He said that, "My conscience compels me to make the following declaration. In the solitude of my prison cell, I have come to the bitter recognition that I have sinned gravely against humanity. As Commandant of Auschwitz, I was responsible for carrying out part of the cruel plans of the Third Reich for human destruction. In so doing, I have inflicted terrible wounds on humanity. I caused unspeakable suffering for the Polish people in particular. I am to pay for this with my life. May the Lord God forgive me one day for what I've done. I ask the Polish people for forgiveness." On the 16th of April 1947, Rudolf Höss was taken from his prison cell and driven towards his former camp of Auschwitz. His execution had been delayed, as there were fears that he would be lynched en route to the camp, but inside of Auschwitz there would be around 100 witnesses who were gathered to watch the execution of the former commandant of the camp. This meant that Höss had a rather public execution. It was not performed within the confines of a prison or a walled area, and there were photographs taken of the proceedings too. But despite the fact there were 100 witnesses, including former prisoners and members of the Polish government, there was a reporting blackout about the event inside of the Polish media. Höss actually was given the last public execution in Poland, as following his death, executions were performed inside of prisons within the confines of an execution chamber and not out in the open. German prisoners of war had created a gallows fitted with a trapdoor hours before, and no one was admitted into Auschwitz unless they had a special pass granted to them by the court. There were armed guards everywhere, and Höss got to the camp at 8 a.m, and he was taken to the building that once housed his office. He had a cup of coffee and drank this, and he then was locked up inside of the torture block of Block 11, a place in which prisoners had been locked up inside his time in command. At 10 a.m, Höss was led out of Block 11, and he made the walk into the centre of the camp to the gallows structure. It was said he strutted and walked energetically, and was then seized by the executioner. His hands were handcuffed behind his back, and the executioner helped him onto the gallows platform. A priest, Father Zaremba, a local man, had been appointed to attend on Höss in his final moments, and to give him spiritual counsel. He approached him whilst he was under the gallows, and then the executioner helped Höss onto a stool, which was placed above the trapdoor of the gallows. The prosecutor then read out the sentence of death, and the hangman secured the noose around Höss's neck. The commandant adjusted it as he moved his head, and when the hangman removed the stool, the trapdoor was activated, and the former commandant's body struck the trapdoor, which opened, and he was left hanging by his neck. At 10:08 a.m, the trapdoor had been opened, and then 30 minutes later, the former commandant of Auschwitz was declared and pronounced dead. As mentioned, there were more than 100 people who witnessed the execution of Rudolf Höss. This included former prisoners and members of the Ministry of Justice, but there were calls to even make it a more public affair, but they were rejected. In the days after his execution, little was said in the newspapers about his execution, and they were actually banned from publishing eyewitness accounts. But Höss was the final man to be publicly executed inside of Poland, but on a specially built gallows for him, within the confines of the former concentration camp that he once oversaw, and he was hanged in front of a crowd of around 100 people. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.